All right, so today I want to talk about DNA testing in ball pythons and why you may or may not want to do genetic testing on your snake. And essentially what DNA testing is you actually take a little piece of shed from your ball python, you can send it in and they do DNA sequencing on that shed. And then from the DNA sequence, they can figure out all the different genes that make up your ball python. For example, this snake that's around my neck here, this is Bobby, my bamboo ball python. So if I took a shed from Bobby and sent it in, not only would they tell me that it's a bamboo, but they could also tell me the gender, which is pretty awesome. That's pretty powerful. As a matter of fact, one year I was breeding a snake through my collection over and over through all these females, and then I realized it was a female instead of a male, and I didn't get any eggs from any of those females. So let me tell you, I'd say probably the number one test that you want to do before you start a breeding season, especially if you don't have proven males and females, is to go through and make sure of your males and your females. And then secondary, I'd say if you're a breeder, especially if you're working with a lot of recessives or multiple genes, it's a good idea to go through and do some DNA testing. But in some cases, I'd say you don't necessarily need to do DNA testing. And in one of those cases, I'd say that's probably if you are not into ball pythons, you go to a reptile show and then you just buy a ball python as a pet. And I'd say even if they told you all the genetics in that ball python is just a casual ball python pet owner, you probably wouldn't understand all the genes unless you were really into ball pythons and really studied all the genes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the internet. I want to show you where you can purchase these DNA tests and some of the projects where you may or may not need DNA testing on your ball pythons. All right, so I'm over here on the internet, and this is the first web page I wanted to show you. This is actually a page on the Rare Genetics website over here at raregeneticsinc.com. And these are all the genes that they can test for with shed testing, taking a piece of shed and sending it in for DNA testing. And take a look at all the genes they have on here. This completely blew me away when I first saw this. I just could not believe they've expanded their testing so much that they have all these genes over here. I was over here a few years ago and there's only a handful of genes over here, which is pretty crazy. The other thing that you can notice here is there's grading on each gene. So for example, albino is an A+. They graded it as an A+. You're probably wondering what that A+ is. They have another page over here on Rare Genetics. A+ is expected accuracy for this test is over 99.9%. So the A, the B, the C, they're all looking at the accuracy of the test. And if you actually look at the accuracy for like A is over 99.9, B is over 99.5, even C is 99% accuracy. So I would say you probably want to, go with the A, B, and C graded tests. Looks like D is below 99% because not enough tests have been run at this time. And I was actually looking over here at some of the genes, and it looked like almost all of them were A, B, and C. There was only one D that I could find, which was monsoon, which is pretty interesting. The monsoon a few years ago was really super expensive. To get into the monsoon project, it was like $10,000 a snake. And I've actually seen the price drop significantly. And I think with the monsoon kind of bleeding into the lower end ball python market where more people can afford it is actually opening up, more genetic testing. Because if they only have, a dozen monsoons that people are working with that are really expensive, it's really hard to dial in a test unless you have a lot of different sheds from a lot of different snakes. So I thought that was interesting. I would imagine eventually the monsoon will increase to a higher grade level as soon as, people start breeding more monsoons. Also, I wanted to show you this over here on Morphmarket. This is actually their genetic testing over here. And this is actually sponsored by the same place, by Rare Genetics Testing. And they actually have 50 morph panels. As a matter of fact, someone down in the comments was saying, yeah, these genetic tests are so expensive. I can't afford $20 or $30 a gene. And that's kind of where it was years ago. But if you actually look at this panel, it's 50 genes. And it's only $139. So that's like less than $3 a gene, which is pretty crazy. That's like almost just a little bit more than $2 a gene. So that is pretty amazing. And it gets a little confusing over here because if you actually look over on the left, it shows all of the genes, but there's actually like 60 plus genes over here. So if you did the 50 morph panel test and you wanted another gene added to it, you'd have to come over here if it wasn't included in the 50 morph panel and actually add it. And then down below, they have the sex determination test, which is probably the number one for me, $25 to $35. To determine the gender of your ball python. I would probably run that even, the probing can be kind of weird because sometimes you probe and it goes really deep and then 100% sure it's a male. Sometimes it's really shallow and then it's 100% for sure a female. But sometimes the probe can kind of go in between the really deep and the really shallow, and then you're like, is this really a male or a female? And it's sometimes it can be really confusing. So, to double check, you can come over here and do the sex determination test. So I want to jump over here on morphmarket.com, and I want to show you some of the genes where you may not need genetic testing, and those are the really visually dominant genes. So for example, if you're breeding like just a handful of really visually dominant genes, kind of like I did when I started, I had a bamboo. I kind of specialized in bamboo, and I had some other really, really dominant genes. So if you actually took the bamboo and you breed it into other combinations, you can definitely tell in most cases, especially just if you have a few genes, that you have bamboo in the mix. And take a look at this. This is kind of like a blast from the past. This one was born in 2014, which is kind of crazy. Sold in 2015, which is like, what, 11 years ago, for $3,000 for a hatchling female bamboo. That's where the price was way back then, 11 years ago. It wasn't that long. And now the bamboos, they're like a fraction of that price. It's pretty amazing how the prices have come down, especially in the last 10 years. It's crazy. So here's another one, the Coral Glow. I actually work with both the Coral Glow and the banana, and people are considering, I'd say in most cases, that the Coral Glow is the same thing as the banana. And the Coral Glow / banana is really visually dominant. So you work it into other genes, and I can almost guarantee it 99% of the time, you'll know that there's a Coral Glow in there. I'd say you probably won't need to test for Coral Glow. As a matter of fact, if you add Coral Glow in with the bamboo and make Coral Glow bamboos, you'll definitely know the Coral Glow from the bamboo from the Coral Glow bamboo. You really don't need genetic testing for that. Some of the really visually dominant projects, you really don't need it. Here's another one I have in my collection. That is the pinstripe. The pinstripe is another really visually dominant gene, especially the pinstripe pattern with the stripes coming down the sides of the snake. A lot of times when you mix pinstripe in, you can see a really strong influence from those stripes, the pattern. As a matter of fact, if you mix pinstripe in with a Coral Glow, the Coral Glow will have the color of the Coral Glow and the pattern of the pinstripe. You can definitely see pinstripe in there. And that's what I have in my collection, the pinstripe, the Coral Glow, and the bamboo. And for some of these, you really don't need genetic testing. So here's another one that you definitely could really score big with genetic testing, and that is with the white snakes, especially this one. This is actually a blue-eyed leucistic, and the blue-eyed leucistic tends to hide all the genes in there. And I've actually come over here quite a few times thinking about buying some of these blue-eyed leucistics. And look at this one. This has possible butter, inchy, lesser, pastel, yellow belly, leopard, clown, and they're saying it's a visual desert ghost for only $300. So you really don't know what the genetics are in here. And if you could actually get in touch with this guy and say, hey, could you send me a little piece of shed that I could test that snake? Or if you just bought the snake and then did genetic testing, you'd know exactly what was in there. And you could get a lot of genes. You could get a really high-end snake for a relatively little amount of money. So these are kind of like the hidden gems over here on Morphmarket when you're actually shopping around, because it's kind of a chance. You don't really know what is in there. And this one, they kind of list what's in there and what's possible in there. So this one's several other genes that could be hiding. Yeah, all the different genes. So that is pretty incredible. So here's another one. You definitely would need genetic testing, I would say, if you bred this through your collection, started breeding into a double, well, it's not really a double recessive. It's a recessive plus it's a yellow belly complex snake. So this is actually the Desert Ghost Freeway. The Desert Ghost is recessive, and then the Freeway consists of two genes that are both in the yellow belly complex. So this is the asphalt and the yellow belly. So for example, if you actually took this snake and you bred it to a normal, you'd get all normal looking snakes that would be 100% het for Desert Ghost. And then half of those snakes would be asphalt, half would be yellow belly. And I'd say in most cases, you can't tell the difference between an asphalt and a yellow belly. So you know, just doing the yellow belly complex test over here could help you really figure out what is in your hatchlings. And then if you started breeding the hatchlings together, especially if you had other genes in the mix, let me tell you, DNA testing would be essential unless you just wanted to guess and be surprised along the way. That'd be, you know, a lot of these projects, you know, are really slow, and it seemed like for the longest time the prices would remain really high on a lot of this stuff because people just had to guess. You just had to breed snakes together, figure out what was in there, and that's why this one, you know, even back in 2021, this one sold for $10,000, which is kind of crazy. And, you know, the guessing has been basically taken out of the equation. You add genetic testing in there, and it's just like so easy now. It's almost like cheating. And I think that's another reason a lot of these prices have really come down on a lot of these projects, because now you can know exactly what all the hets are without trying to grow all your hatchlings and then breed them over and over and over to see if it actually is in there. You know, a lot of times if you breed if you breed an asphalt and yellow belly together, you don't necessarily get this on the first shot. So a lot of people, you know, they would grow them up, which would be like 3 years, and then they would have a clutch, and well, there's no freeways, so let's try to breed it again. And sometimes in the second year, you'd actually produce one, and sometimes you just breed it year after year, and usually after the third year with no freeways, you'd be like, you just give up. And that's why the prices were so high, because it took so much time and so much guesswork and so much effort without the genetic testing. So here's a couple snakes that you would definitely, for sure, need genetic testing. So I came over here and looked at the snakes with the most genes. I've actually seen a lot of people do this. I've seen some YouTube videos where people breed two snakes together, and they had so many genes in each of the snake that they would sit there for hours and try to pick out the genes. And it was like almost virtually impossible and so frustrating watching them over there. So take a look at this one. This one actually is listed as a leopard, spot nose, fire, orange dream, yellow belly, desert ghost, clown, double het, genetic stripe, pied. Look at that. All these different genes in this snake. And if you're actually to take a snake like this and breed it to another snake, for example, this one, take a look at this one. This one actually has banana, enchi, fire, orange dream, pastel, yellow belly, calico, het, desert ghost, puzzle, all in this snake. And if you bred those two together, you would get a mind-boggling amount of genes in all of your offspring. As a matter of fact, I actually came over here to the genetic calculator over here on Morphmarket. I don't even know if this is going to work. I kind of paused there for a minute, and I put all the genes from those two snakes into the genetic calculator. As a matter of fact, the last one I put in here was puzzle, and I thought I crashed the server over here on Morphmarket because it was like cranking away trying to calculate this combination. And as a matter of fact, I got an error that said it couldn't do the puzzle. It was like too many genes over here, which is kind of crazy. And look at the odds of producing all the genes in one snake. 1 in 8,192. The odds are 0%. There's so many over here. And if you actually just scroll down, I scrolled down for a while, and it was mind-boggling. I was here for like 5 minutes just scrolling down, and it was just so many combinations. 1 in 2,048 that you would actually get all these genes in the same snake. 14 genes, which is kind of crazy. So this is where DNA testing definitely comes into play and shines for sure. And kind of the interesting thing I saw about this is if you actually did buy these snakes and breed them together, I was looking at some of the problems in a lot of genes over here. So for example, This ball python over here has fire in it. And then this other one also has fire in it. So 25% of the time you get a super fire. And take a look at this. This is actually a banana super fire. So the super fire is an all-white snake, but it's so visually dominant that it masks all the other genes. As a matter of fact, I was over here on Morphmarket looking at all the super fires, sorting from the highest genes, and I could not find one super fire that anything bled through. All the genes were completely masked by the super fire. So you come over here and you have all these thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of combinations over here, and 25% of them would be completely masked by the super fire. And there's another problem too with this combination. This one has yellow belly. This other one has yellow belly. So 25% of the time you would get an ivory. So take a look at this. This is an ivory. It's another all-white snake, the super yellow belly. But the interesting thing about the ivory is there's only 2 genes that can break through the ivory. So if we actually come back and look at all these genes with this pairing, this one has Enchi, and this one has leopard. So the leopard and the Enchi, both of those genes are the only 2 genes that I know that can actually break through the yellow belly. And kind of the interesting thing is if you had either one of those genes, individual or both together is more powerful. If you have an Enchi, leopard, ivory, it actually shows a lot of pattern through the snake. And not only does it show the pattern, but it also brings the other genes with it, which is pretty interesting. I actually did a whole video on the ivory, and those are the only 2 genes that I could find that would break through the ivory. I actually pulled one up over here. Take a look at this. This is a pastel Enchi leopard ivory. So take a look at this. With the Enchi and the leopard, it actually breaks through the ivory and it's pulling the pastel with it to make this crazy looking snake. So if you had an ivory without the Enchi and the leopard, you'd basically get an all-white snake. You'd definitely need either the Enchi or the leopard to pull genes through the ivory. But let me tell you, with those 2 white snakes in this combination, I would probably pick 2 different snakes where you don't get the super fire or the super yellow belly. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And the BFN asks, when breeding snakes together to make blue-eyed leucistics, does gender matter? I'm planning on getting a blue-eyed leucistic female, breeding it to another type of male. What can I do to make the most number of blue-eyed leucistic offspring? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, if you have 2 snakes, it doesn't matter if the genes are in your male or in your female, you get the same number of blue-eyed leucistics. Where it does matter is if you start picking up more females. A lot of times people will say to really load down your males with a lot of genes, that way you can work them through your females. So if you actually had a blue-eyed leucistic male and decided to pick up another female with a blue-eyed leucistic gene in that female, you can make more blue-eyed leucistics. Another way to increase the number of blue-eyed leucistics is to actually breed 2 blue-eyed leucistics together and have a whole clutch of all white snakes. Keep in mind that not all snakes in the blue-eyed leucistic are actually an all-white snake. So you can have, for example, if you made a super Mojave, it's an all-white snake, but it kind of has a grayed out head. Pretty much the best blue-eyed leucistic that you can make is the combination of lesser and Mojave. So what I would do is, if I was going after the most number of awesome blue-eyed leucistics, like a pure white snake with bright blue eyes, I would actually pick up like a super lesser. As a matter of fact, I went over on Morphmarket and I saw a super lesser female that was 2,200 grams for sale over there. So you could pick that up as a female. Then you could pick up a smaller male. A male doesn't have to really be that big. You can pick up like a 700-800 gram male and use like a super Mojave male. You breed the super Mojave male to the super lesser female and you would get a whole clutch of lesser Mojave, which is pretty much the ideal blue-eyed leucistic. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.